call this work session regarding the MOA Trust Fund Board of Trustees to order. And we'll start with the introduction, starting with Mr. Martinez.
George Martinez. Zach Johnson.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Ms. Salatel, Chair Constant will be here shortly, and we'll go ahead and go on down the table, please. Just make sure you hit the mic so that the green button comes on.
Jeffrey Sims.
Alex Slivka.
Ty Schomer. Oh, Ty Schomer. Ty Schomer.
Failed the test, sorry.
Yes.
Julie Farley.
Ross Risvold.
Travis Frist.
Okay, and on the phone, we have Mr. Cross.
Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Rivera?
Present.
All right, great. Is there someone from the administration who's going to kick us off here today to give us a quick introduction to why we're here?
Thought,
Is Mr. Thurn?
third, yeah, I thought.
Oh, he may have stepped out as well. Okay. So, all right. Well, let's do this then. Since there are 6 of you, and we have a limited period of time, first, let me thank you all for being here. I know getting 6 individual schedules coordinated with our schedules is pretty much a very, very big lift. And so thanks to you, Mr. Soriano, for really coordinating that. So I think what we can do is just start with a couple sentences introduction. Tell us who you are and why you'd like to serve on the board. And then from there, we'll, when Mr. Thurn comes back, we'll give him a chance to do his formal introduction.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. As I said, my name is Jeffrey Sims. I've been retired about 5 years. Among other things, I'm a past CFO of the municipality of Anchorage. Served in that capacity for 4 years. Have a long background in public sector financial management, and also the last 10 years before I retired, I worked as the CFO and Chief Investment Officer for the Bristol Bay Native Corporation. I currently serve on the Investment Advisory Commission, which is about to go away, and also on the Anchorage Regional Landfill Closure, Post-Closure Investment Fund on their board. I'm interested in serving in this position because since retiring, I've been interested in identifying opportunities to utilize the knowledge and skills that I acquired during some 50 years or so of educational training and a professional career to provide a meaningful benefit to the community that I live in. And I think that the MOA Trust Board, Board of Trustees, is a unique opportunity to do so.
Chair Zalatel. So Alex Slivka, like Jeff, I served as the CFO for the municipality for a number of years. Like him, I also served on the Investment Advisory Commission that, as you are aware, is sunsetting for many years, including chairing it for a number of years. I am currently working as the CFO for the University of Alaska Foundation, which has consolidated assets of a little over $500 million. I'm very much interested in serving on this. I have a long history of volunteering my time to help the community by providing, unlike Jeff, I only have 40 years of investment banking experience, but I think it's very important to give back to the community, and I'm happy to serve in this capacity as a solicitor. Thank you.
Ty Schomer, like these two, I've served on the Investment Advisory Commission Board in the past. Was a former president of it as well. I own Arbor Capital Management, which is a small RIA here in town. Have been working with investment policy statements and with investments of these types for 30 years for private individuals, endowments, and smaller pensions. They didn't make me miserable last time I was serving in this capacity, and it is an important step that they're taking with what we're about to do, so I was willing to lend what I have to offer in terms of experience towards the group once again.
Chair Salatel, it's Julie Farley. I have been working in investments for about 20 years, so I might be the junior one here. I'm currently chair of the Investment Advisory Commission. I believe strongly in good stewardship and being a fiduciary, and serving on the commission is one way I can contribute to my community and be that for the city.
Thank you, Julie, and Ms. Zalatel and Mr. Constant and others. I'm Ross Risvold, and I do have an interest in serving on this board. My experience dates back to 1983 when I joined Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. I managed the debt and investments there for almost 14 years. And then I went off to the private sector for a short time, and then came back to public service in 2004 when I joined the municipality here and worked for Jeff Sins, as a matter of fact. And when I began here at the municipality, and where I managed the debt and a portion of the investments here at the municipality, mainly the internal investment portfolio, as well as the municipal cash pool or public finance division, which I manage, sort of manages the managers of that money. My experience is on boards goes back to probably the beginning was with I've attended most of the Investment Advisory Commission meetings since 2004 because they serve as an investment advisor to the municipal cash pool and public finance, where we manage the municipal cash pool, and that sort of goes away. And in exchange for that, we suggested in a code when Glenn and Dan wrote it that instead of having the Investment Advisory Commission sort of provide investment advice to the municipality's public finance division, we offered to, and we did at the time already had a independent investment advisor for the municipal cash pool, which made a lot of sense, and that frees up the responsibility of this board or commission, as it is today, to focus on an endowment here, which is, hopefully to last forever, to provide funds to the municipality. So I'm chair of the pre-funding investment program here at the municipality. I was on the ARO, which is Asset Retirement Obligation Investment Fund Board for ML&P, the retirement of the restoration of the gas field across the bay, and I'm also on the Anchorage Regional Landfill Closure and Post-Closure Care Investment Fund Board. So I do have a great deal of experience with investments, and certainly look forward to serving on this board if possible.
Thank you, through the chair. My name is Travis Frisk. I, like Mr. Sins and Mr. Slivka, I'm a former CFO for the municipality of Anchorage. And my current position, I'm the CFO for Credit Union One, which is a $1.5 billion institution. I'm partially to blame for all of us being here today, because when I was acting CFO here, it was at that time that we had just recently received the drop-in of all the money and funding from the MLP cell, which created a big war chest inside the trust. And at that point in time, we reviewed all the parameters around it and discovered that we might have had a weakness in that we had one individual that controlled all outcomes. So Dan Moore and I worked on getting the framework up, and then it was finished by Dan and Glenn and Alden recently with you folks to create this trustee board specifically to ensure that the safety of this money is well guarded by a board of trustees. I consider myself lucky to even be sitting here in this room with you guys to be discussing being on this board. It's a critical piece of our future, and we need to safeguard it. We need to be good stewards and good fiduciaries of this in order to generate revenue back to the municipality. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So the way these confirmation hearings typically work is we open up the floor to membership for any questions they may have. If we have questions for all individuals, let's just keep in consideration that there are 6 of them and 6 answers may take a little bit of time, so possibly yes, no, or you could do specific questions to individual members. With that, anyone like in the queue to ask any questions? Yes, Mr. Martinez.
Just a comment, thank you. I appreciate that there are professionals willing to continue to serve in these roles in our community that really are meaningful, that matter. I'm familiar with the work. I'm familiar with a few of you all as individuals, and so I just wanted to just thank you all for stepping up and for being here to do this stewardship. And I think that word really resonates just with me, and I just appreciate you all. Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Johnson.
Thanks. I don't think my questions are for the applicants. I think it's probably for the CFO or somebody who's been reading the ordinance. What's the length of a term?
Which mic?
Any mic you can get up to. There's one right over here.
I'll take this. I'll set amongst you guys.
Join.
The slippery slope.
And there's actually a small error in one of these to begin with that we just discovered yesterday, so I'll kind of communicate that as well. But initially on this initial seating of the board, there will be 3 positions that need to be 2-year positions and 3 positions that need to be 4-year positions. And then at that point, and we have it as 4 and 2, so we need it as 3 and 3. So that was our mistake that we found from code. But that's in code as was approved, that's how the initial sitting of the board works.
But the rolling terms are how long?
You can do 4-year terms. The group that is initially seated in a 2-year term is still eligible for 2 4-year terms following that.
And that's standard code, that's fine.
Very standard, yes.
I'm curious why we wouldn't actually do 3 groups, rotate them. You know, we have 25 and 27. Why wouldn't we do 2 and 25, 2 and 26, and 2 and 27?
We are following the code that was approved by the assembly at the assembly meeting. That was what was originally written. So what Dan and Glenn worked on, that's what was put forward, and now we're trying to adhere to what the process was.
So which one are you thinking will change?
It currently says in code seat 1, 2, and 3. So that would actually be, I think, Jeff's initial one, which would allow him to be 2 years to begin with and then 2 4-year terms after that.
Right, any partial term in our code doesn't count towards your limit. So that's standard. Okay, I think, and where do we hold these funds? The trust?
I would have to address that. Can I see the mirror?
Yep. Where, yeah.
Do you need a mic?
Here you go.
Okay. I'm Glenn Cipriano, acting municipal treasurer. These funds are held in various locations. Principal, a bank, and Principal Securities are our main custodians, but some of these are held as they're private investments at the investment firm itself.
And what is the investment firm?
We have 11 different investment asset managers. 2 are private and the rest are public.
I ask this, and maybe I don't understand it exactly. I have a friend who actually works at Arbor and that. And so are we keeping any money with Arbor?
No, there's no conflict of interest for me sitting here.
Thank you very much.
Great. I have a question, and then we'll see if there are others. So, I guess I'd like to know a little bit about kind of your personal philosophy around this funding, and how you think it fits into the overall financial picture of the MOA. I think that's might be a hard question to answer in brief, but because I think as you do this work as a board, which used to be really, the treasurer being advised, it's good to know kind of what direction you're coming at it from for our purposes as we're planning the budgets and kind of putting municipality hopefully on some kind of strategic financial track. Thank you.
How much time do I have?
Well, it depends how much you want to leave for everybody else.
So I'll try to be quick, but it's a big question you asked, and with multiple parts. But the origin of the assets that are in the trust come from the sale of ATU, at least primarily from the sale of ATU and ML&P, which were two municipally owned and operated enterprise funds, and represent essentially the liquidation, the net liquidation of the assets that were invested in those enterprise activities. Both those enterprise activities have paid distributions back to the municipality of Anchorage, which has served as a tax benefit to the citizens of Anchorage. And so with the liquidation of those enterprise funds and the deposit of those assets, those net assets into the municipal trust, its function remains now, rather than funding the enterprise activities. It's instead to produce a return that is used to offset the tax requirement necessary to fund the general government of the municipality of Anchorage, tax benefit. So I think that the other part of your question has to do with philosophy. I think, as a fiduciary and as a trustee, it's to make decisions regarding the management of those assets that produce a return that's sufficient first to preserve the purchasing power of the trust, essentially inflation-proof the trust, and then secondarily to provide a sufficient return in excess of that to provide a meaningful tax benefit or tax offset to the citizens of Anchorage through a distribution or a dividend coming from the trust annually. And I think currently that's in the neighborhood of 4%. It's varied between 4 and 5%, I think, since the origin of the trust. And I think, at least based on current capital market forecasts, something in that range, currently the lower end of that range, appears reasonable on a go-forward basis. So, but consistent with most similar trusts, public trusts, the objective is first preservation of principal, the corpus of the trust. It's to provide sufficient liquidity to meet the objectives of the trust, that tax benefit or tax offset. And then third is to provide a reasonable rate of return consistent with whatever the investment market or capital markets are providing.
Well, I mean, it's your choice if you want to answer. So, got anything to add?
I guess I would Jeff covered it all quite clearly, and I would just observe relative to the history of the trust. It was not unique in that New York City as well had a similar function with a singular trustee, but I do applaud the movement to a board structure. I wouldn't anticipate that you would see dramatic changes at all. The way the Investment Advisory Commission worked is that Dan sought guidance and generally followed the guidance. So it was a collaborative effort, and I would expect that we would see continued structure in that same fashion. So I wouldn't expect to see much changes at all. It's the goal, as Jeff has said, is long-term for the benefit of the citizens of Anchorage. I'll stop there.
Yeah, most of us have worked together on that commission in the past, productively. So the pool has an investment policy statement. The investment policy statement governs a lot of the decision-making. Our role, or at least my understanding, is that our role here isn't to determine how this fits in with broader city finances. That's your job. But to make sure that this pool is governed according to the investment policy statement and is prudently under MIFA as we can.
And adding on to these three who have covered it all pretty well, I would say my personal approach to investing, given the structure of the fund, I think asset allocation is important. I think that drives 90% of the returns. That's proven. It's not just what I think. I like to focus on expenses. I think that's important for anyone managing a fund. you'll see we have the Vanguard fund in the portfolio, and Vanguard is one of the lowest cost managers out there. So that's important to me, in addition to what's been previously said.
One of the things I might point out is it's just not the six of us. We also have an independent investment advisor alongside of us, in tandem with us, advising us along the way. And that investment advisor has a world of resources and experience with other like clients, state and local governments, particularly so other endowment funds. So it's just not the six of us with six individual ideas that we try to merge together. That's a critical piece of this board, as well as part of my philosophy to work together with the board members and our independent investment advisor.
I think the placement of my chair is perfect because these guys cover everything. From a philosophical standpoint, personally, I always like to get the most yield for the least amount of risk. And I'm not saying avoiding risk, I'm talking about mitigating risk. And that's what our jobs will be, is to adhere to ensure that we create a yield that produces for the municipality by mitigating risk and working in conjunction with each other. So that's the only thing I have to add to this. Everything else has been covered from top to bottom.
Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate digging into this. Two questions that I have, and again, I think this is for everybody, but you're welcome to answer or not. Going off of Mr. Frist's comment about risk, I'm curious, all of your kind of perspectives on that risk management, and then specifically curious your thoughts on how much is kept, especially in cash or very safe investments versus more riskier ones, knowing that we're looking at a very long term, but we're also talking about a municipal trust fund. And then my other question is, also in terms of kind of the choices you might make, other places have talked about divestment from certain funds, or thinking about not just the financial returns, but other factors. And I'll use the example of thinking of climate change and the clear impact that will have on Alaska and the rest of the world. So I'm curious your guys' thoughts about whether you're approaching it purely from a return standpoint, or are there other kind of values or recommendations that you would make or not make based on that kind of larger view, knowing that you guys, of course, are managing a fund. Thanks.
Jeff, how about I start first and go back down the line?
Sure.
So as Ty recently just pointed out, we are driven by an investment policy statement. So the statement is already written. It doesn't mean it can't be adjusted accordingly. Social responsible investing is absolutely a key component of any investment policy statement. I think we need to be careful when we set out what we're going to do from that standpoint. A large part of our economy, not only in Anchorage but in the state, is oil-based. So it would kind of be suicidal, in my opinion, if we were to cut our nose off, spite our face, and say we're not going to do anything in the oil space. That would be, but at the same time, I could obviously see we wouldn't want to be necessarily investing in a diamond company in South Africa that is using child labor or something to that effect. I get your point, but we need to be careful with that aspect of it. I'll leave it at that for now.
In investing in the kinds of alternative investments that you've suggested that are there, there's certainly things that the board could consider. Green investments, other particular new idea investments are things that have to be carefully evaluated because our goal here is return for the most part, including, of course, safety of investments. One of the things that we were keenly aware of a number of years ago was companies that invested in, there was genocide occurring in Sudan, and we looked at the municipal cash pool to see if there were, see if we were invested in companies that were supporting the genocide that was going on. And it was an effort that we looked at, and it really was became a non-issue after a few years. And we removed that policy because we weren't investing in companies like that, and it was taking a great deal of effort to monitor that. And then if you're also invested in an investment fund that has other managers, you really can't control what they invest in. So that's another aspect of that kind of investment alternative or strategy that needs to be carefully evaluated by the board.
And since we are fiduciaries, and since the investment policy is as written, I would think that we would need additional statute clarification before deviating from that and having other considerations. So as it's written, the decisions we would make would be on a risk-adjusted basis, seeking the maximum return to get to keep up with inflation and to spin off the dividend. That's what I consider the mandate to be, and if the mandate changes to consider other issues, then I would think that we would need specific additional guidance on that.
Consideration, yes, increasingly thinking about these things and being aware of these things are increasingly a part of the investment thought process and discourse. Not that they necessarily dictate, but they are increasingly important. And I can give one specific example. Increasingly, as we look at municipal bonds, taxable or tax-free, funding of infrastructure and funding of projects in areas that are being affected by climate change changes the risk profile. So we're starting to see that start to creep into the municipal bond market in some areas. So that's just one example, I think, of what you're trying to drive at. Yes, be aware of them, bake them into your thinking and your analysis, and then that's just part of the process.
I think Julie and Ty hit it pretty correctly. Ty did mention that we are driven by MIFA, which is state code related to pension management. I think the thing to always remember is, we invest per the investment guidelines for a specific long-term benefit, and it can be easy in hindsight to say maybe you took too much risk, didn't take enough risk. You think back to March of 2020 when the whole world shut down, and it could have been very easy to have stepped outside of the investment policy and maybe held more cash than we otherwise would. And for example, generally it's going to be fully invested in income-oriented securities, so possibly not a lot of cash. But you'll remember that downturn lasted exactly 1 month and then proceeded to record highs. So, I think that, this, first through the commission and probably through the board, you'll see a lot of stability and not a lot of changes, as Julie said. Asset allocation and stable asset allocation is a critical role in long-term success.
I agree pretty much with everything that's been said here, but I think to address specifically what I think is the intent of your question, which has to do with socially responsible investing, and the notion that prudent long-term investing is sort of by definition socially responsibly, or socially responsible investing is by definition a prudent and sustainable long-term strategy. I think it's necessary to point out that that's one of the first issues that the new board is going to have to discuss. And the reason it's going to be on the table is that the charter amendment specifically references that the Board of Trustees will manage the assets consistent with the Uniform Prudent Investment Act and the Investor Act. The Uniform Prudent Investor Act specifically addresses this, and how it addresses it and what that means to the management of the trust is something that we're going to have to resolve and I think communicate to the Assembly. And to the extent that A literal interpretation of that means socially responsible investing is not the primary objective or not a major consideration. And the Assembly has, I'm going to say, views different than that, then it's something that's going to have to be resolved. But I think right now, the Uniform Prudent Investor Act specifically indicates that that should not be a consideration.
A quick clarification question. Was that in the charter amendment or the code provision that established?
If I may, it's both. I'm looking at the charter here. And
What is the specific statement in charter?
it's section B. I'll just hand it to you rather than reading it to you. I underlined where it appears.
And this is an ongoing discussion in the investment community now too, so it's very, just so you know, it's actively being discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify too, you know, I'm not coming at this thinking that you should or shouldn't invest in certain things, but I appreciate the discussion. And also on my mind is thinking about how we invest in Alaska, you know, knowing that we're not always the best financial return, right? But there's infrastructure needs, there's bonds that other communities may issue, you know, those kinds of things. So I think it's something to keep thinking about is how we invest in ourselves. Thanks.
So I have myself in the queue with a couple of questions. First, it's a question for Alden. Alden, does the department contemplate these as voluntary or paid positions?
First off, there is 7 positions, so I just want to make sure that it's those 6 plus a current CFO. So I want to just highlight that again. I believe that was written in there was it's a volunteer position. However, there's a $300 stipend, I believe, for non-municipal employees. I'm looking at Glenn, he wrote it. But I believe if there is a $300 stipend.
So it's not like the PFD, Permanent Corporation, or that. Thank you. And then, so the question I'm kind of interested in, it does follow on with this conversation about prudent investments, is people's thoughts about kind of emerging markets, Bitcoin in particular. I would start with you, Mr. Shorn, because I know Arbor has Arbor Digital, and I want to understand where you all come at that question, because from where I sit, that's a pretty high-risk endeavor.
It's certainly a very volatile endeavor, for sure. And me personally, we have Arbor Digital. Arbor Digital is solely focused on digital assets. It's a separate subdivision within Arbor Capital. So we're active and have been active in that place. Well, you know Matt, so he's been active there since 2010. But where we use that internally, we suggest to clients that they entertain having maybe 1 or 2% of the portfolio, no more than 5 there. And the way that I communicated with most of our client base is this is kind of like, now there's no perfect corollaries, but this is kind of like maybe the internet in 1996, where we all learned how to type something into a browser and then things came out. The people that were at the front of that said that this is going to revolutionize the world. Normal people like me didn't understand how that was going to happen, but indeed it did. And so it isn't so much Bitcoin or Ethereum, but the technology that supports that is now already having a significant impact on how business is done, how transactions are getting done. And so I think that will continue. That says nothing about whether or not you should invest in it or not, and how you invest in it, whether you own the underlying or whether you focus on the technology. There's a variety of ways to do that. I think as the regulatory environment gets a little clearer, and that's one of the biggest risks right now with digital assets is the regulatory environment. So as that gets a little bit clearer, then I think you'll see institutions come into the investing landscape with tools or accounts or approaches that might then be appropriate for the consideration of this board. Does that answer your question?
Very well, thank you. Glenn?
May I insert a comment here? The permitted investments for the MOA trust fund are listed in code, and right now digital assets are not permitted. Okay, so that code would have to be changed for the fund to invest in digital assets.
That actually raises a second question. This is really Ms. Alto's question, but I'll ask it because this is germane. it's no secret to people that have been watching municipal government for the last 2 to 3 years that there has been a bit of a pretty tense back and forth between the branches of government. And so in the enabling language, we specifically encoded that the board provides input to both the executive and to the assembly. So historically, a good example where it's a bit fraught is with bond counsel, who we've had the same company apparently for like 75 years, longer than we've been a city. Obviously not the same individuals, but the same company. And the individual currently in that role provides intensive input and conversation with the administration, and then feels shocked when the assembly says, when are you gonna work with us? We haven't heard anything. We get this endpoint conversation and it's too late to do anything. And so functionally, there actually, at least in some points in time, is zero engagement with the legislative branch of this government, the policy setting branch of this government. And so what are your thoughts on how, as a board, you can and will engage with the assembly? Because there might be questions about extensions of investment vehicles or other matters that need to be brought. How do you foresee engaging in active conversation with the legislative branch?
I'll take first shot. I think Glenn said quite clearly, we're going to be driven by code and statute. So code and statute says we communicate with you, and if there's a change to be made, it goes through the assembly. And so I would envision that it would be a collaborative process should some changes be proposed. I wouldn't anticipate anything happening. Like this code and the enabling language is pretty clear in terms of how you manage long-term assets for the benefit of the community. I don't anticipate there would be much of a change. But if there was, I think your statement is quite clear that we would collaborate with both entities.
I guess silence means everyone agrees.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else questions? Okay. Anybody wish to give a final closing statement before we adjourn?
These are money people, I love it.
Mr. Thurn.
I just want to thank them all for being here today. I know that there were some trips that were canceled and plans being remade and so forth. You have a very strong team right here. I assumed before I came back in, and you said 50 years, and then 40 and 30 and 20. So this is not a young team. This is an experienced and educated team that is going forward here. And I think they're well aware of the importance of this trust fund and the income that is provided to the municipality going forward. So I would support, hopefully, my recommendation of this team. I think they're a very strong team, and I'm hoping on the 12th of September you will support them in doing this. I know you know our timeline and so forth. We really would like to get their terms are scheduled to start on October 15th, and we would love to try to hit that date if possible. I'm hoping that you were able to answer all your questions today of this group. And like I said, I just want to thank them for getting out of their jobs and coming over here and having this opportunity for you today. So thank you.
And I will also say thank you for those of you who made changes to be here. It might seem like a short and pithy meeting for the change you had to make, but it's will reflect upon you for being here. Thank you, everybody, and I guess no other questions or comments, we'll stand adjourned.